Are you an investigative professional? Did you know you can find the best private investigator resources using investigatorstoolbox.com? This resource community was built exclusively for licensed investigators and investigative professionals. You can network directly with members, educate yourself through free webinars and blogs, and even create your own customizable research library. Membership starts for as little as 49 cents a day. Download the Investigator's Toolbox app or visit our webpage at www.investigators-toolbox.com.
Is a good case management system keeping you from taking your business to the next level? Crosstracks is the premier case management system for the investigative community. They're the only SOC 2 certified case management software available. Visit crosstracks.com, tell them you're a listener, and save even more. Get a plan in place for the new year to grow your business to the next level. NCISS is inviting all investigative professionals to join an open town hall meeting on Tuesday, February 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. There are some major data privacy concerns on the horizon that you should know about. This could affect our ability to do investigative work. The meeting is free to attend, so visit NCISS.com to register or check the show notes for a clickable link. Welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Sticking to the issue of death cases, on this episode we speak with Colorado's own Rchel Roberts. Rchel recently helped achieve a big legal victory based on creating a timeline. The use of technology and investigative skill helped her overturn a murder conviction due to an apparent suicide. She also discusses her experience of testifying during COVID. So please welcome Rchel Roberts and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everybody to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. This is your host, Matt Spaier. Today we're in New York and we got some snow coming, and we're reaching out to Colorado where there's tons of snow. So I want to welcome Rchel Roberts to the program. Rchel, how are you?
Hi, Matt. Doing well. Less snow over here than you might think. Thanks for having me.
No problem. No problem. I appreciate you coming on. We've been talking for a while about having you on, and the timing just wasn't right. You have a very busy practice, and you're definitely involved in a lot of different types of projects and things. So tell me what exactly is your business, and how'd you get into it?
Sure. I would say that 95% of my work is criminal defense investigations. I do a little bit of civil rights investigations. Those are plaintiff cases. But for the most part, criminal defense, violent crimes, sexual assault, a little bit of white collar fraud, although that's not my forte. I think I'm going to stay away from that for a little bit.
Right.
And I got into investigations in a very roundabout way. In college, my degree is actually environmental design, but junior year, I added journalism as a second major. I decided that I just loved looking into everything, and investigative journalism was a course that I took and really fell in love with. I had an amazing opportunity to work as a student correspondent for the Boston Globe. There was a massive tornado that ripped through Western Massachusetts, obviously very uncommon. And we partnered up with the Globe, my investigative journalism course. It was their Spotlight team, which, if you're not familiar, they're the investigative team for the Globe. They're a Pulitzer Prize winning group. Wow. And there's actually a movie called The Spotlight. I think it's called just Spotlight. Okay. And my mentor at the Globe is played by Brian Darcy James in that movie. Cool. He was the data nerd in the movie. He's Maddie. In real life, he's Matt Carroll. So he was my mentor. We went house to house and collected, data on storm damage, did a lot of work on insurance and FEMA and how these victims of the storm were getting help. And that's when I really fell in love with data analysis.
Right.
From there, I tried to get a journalism job, couldn't find one that paid. And I interviewed at NPR in Boston. And the editor there said, I don't have a paying job, but you should really talk to my wife. So I started talking to her. She ran a small research boutique called the Indigo Group. I worked there for 4 years. We investigated corporate fraud and false claims of companies with multi-billion-dollar market caps. Most of them were medical device companies or pharmaceutical drug companies. As you can imagine, there's plenty of fraud there to be found. So I started doing a little data analysis with that as well. Went to a week-long boot camp at the National Institute of Computer Assisted Reporting, which is at Mizzou, the University of Missouri.
Okay.
And so for 4 years, I spent some time doing a lot of data analysis for that job, and was kind of thinking, I was doing a lot of legal work, legal research, and thought to myself, I'm kind of getting over this.
Right.
Really, corporate fraud, it's the white collar stuff. I just don't, it's not my thing. And thought about going to law school, but I knew it was a huge time and money commitment. So I thought that I should figure out if that's something I really wanted to do.
Yeah, I can.
And why don't I
relate to that? Totally. Yeah.
You thought about that too?
I did the same thing. So I was lining up to go to law school. The attorney I was working for in-house was like, "You'd be a great lawyer. Go to law school and I'll pay you like you're an employee. And then when you're done, you just come work for me." I was like, "Sweet, that's great." And then I saw how much it was going to cost to go to law school, and I'm like, I think I'll write a business plan to start a business instead. So.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, having done this for 5.5 years now, I think we get to have all the fun.
Yeah.
Legal investigators, we're the ones out there pounding the pavement, and they're sitting at their desk writing motions. So I think I made the right decision here.
I'm right there. I couldn't go through the deposition transcripts. Was like, my eyes were crossing trying to read this stuff, because I was doing all the pre-trial for the guy that I was working for. It's like, get everything organized for me and give me the bullet points and all that. So, it was good. It helped me understand, the business and what I needed to look for and things like that. And I think even the FEMA stuff that you're doing, the going out and the door knocking, like, you're developing social skills, social engineering, doing that. So it's like one thing is building into the next and building into the next. I'm sure there were tons of things you learned while doing that you brought with you for your next thing, right?
Absolutely. And I think, journalism in itself is curiosity and persistence and everything else you can learn, right? And I think it's the same for investigation. As long as you're curious and persistent, those guys at the Globe, they always said their sort of motto was, the hardest part of my job is, and always has been, picking up the phone. You just got to pick up the phone. Yeah. And that's so true with investigation too. I find a lot of people just don't like calling, or, I sometimes say I'm sort of like a professional harasser, but in a polite way, of course, because you don't get anything if you're not nice to people. But
you got to do kids gloves. And it's almost like, there is that social engineering aspect to it, right? You would want somebody to do this for you. I'm trying to make this as inconvenient as possible for you, or not inconvenient, right? We're trying to make it convenient for you. And, just got a few minutes. Like I always say, like, I just got a couple of questions for you, right? It's 25 minutes.
Yeah,
later,
exactly. And I always like to try and empower the person too, right? You pick up the phone, you call, I'm not too sure if I'm in the right place.
Right.
Feel free to forward me to the right person, but I have this question and I don't know who can answer it.
Well, that's a real key to this, right? Is inserting somebody into the narrative. I say it all the time when I talk about this stuff, right? People have this desire to be a part of the story, right? They want to say, like, this is what I saw. I can contribute. I can help. Our personalities typically as humans is we want to do that, right? Not everybody's like that, but for the most part, there is. And if you approach that situation where it's like this person is the most valuable person you're speaking to and make them feel that way, you're really going to get good results. I remember I had a premises case where this guy, he worked for the city, but the case was against a private company. And this guy, like, every day when he went to work, he saw this defect, and it was like really bothering him that they never fixed it. And this guy would actually call 311 and make complaints. So we were able to, like, find him, and he was so angry that he made all these complaints and nothing was ever done, to have this thing fixed. He was like, he couldn't wait to get on the stand.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to find those people.
Yeah. I was like, I didn't even have to ask him. He was just like, yeah, when am I going to court? So here we go. So that's cool.
Always nice to have a willing witness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would assume it's a lot easier on the personal injury side than it is on the criminal side. I don't do much criminal work. What's been your experience with that and dealing with trying to get people to testify?
It's tough, particularly when you have a lot of adverse witnesses. I would say it's everyone takes a side, right? And what I always try to express to witnesses, regardless of whether we think they'll be favorable or not so much, is all we really want is the truth, right?
Right.
I don't, I'm not asking you to say something to make my client look good or bad. I just want you to be truthful and, be complete in what you're saying and not have selective memories. A lot of confirmation bias that goes on, and especially with cases that are in the media. And so it can be hard. But I think generally speaking, most people understand, that this is, it's a judicial process. I had a case, my federal case recently that went to trial up in Wyoming. It was a penny stock pump and dump, which I will probably never do again. Yeah. And I had this, kind of cowboy. He was like the Marlboro Man. I mean, he sounded like the Marlboro Man and looked like the Marlboro Man too. And he went by the name Red. So okay. That actually, he was a character, and I got along well with him, but yeah. He was not favorable of, he didn't like my client at all. And I said, that's okay. I'm not asking you to like, I'm just asking you to tell the truth. And he's like, well, and I gave him a subpoena, and of course it's a court order, but well, why should I come and talk for, on his behalf? And, of course I do the gentle, well, you don't really have a choice. I say it in nicer words, but I also just say, this is a constitutional right. Everyone has the right to be presumed innocent until they're found guilty. And so, it's due process. If you believe in the Constitution, then you should be okay with going through this process.
Well, as a cowboy, you probably tugged on some heartstrings right there.
Yeah, I thought the Constitution talk might work well for that. So.
Tell him there's a pack of unfiltered camels there for him too.
Well, ironically, this conversation took place in a smoking cafe in Wyoming at about 6:30 in the morning.
So, of course it did.
There was a lot of smoke going around. Yeah.
Of course it did. I wouldn't expect anything other than that. Yeah. That's fantastic. I'm sure, it's difficult to approach those situations and really get a read on who you're talking to and finding those things that you can hang on to and really drive home. It's great that you were able to identify that and play on that theme that is going to touch someone's heart to have them testify on behalf. And, you brought up a really good point, right? It's not that we want you to say a certain thing or do a certain thing. It's just reporting on the truth, right? And I think as investigators, that's how we succeed, and not having that real vested interest on, having it go one way or the other. If you can stay neutral and just report on whatever it is, you're going to go far in this business because, first of all, you don't take it home with you as much, right? And second of all, it is what it is,
I am very bad at the not taking it home. Yeah. I can, my husband can attest to that as well.
Yeah, I have a very understanding spouse also. She's like, sure, honey, tell me about your day. Here we go again. It's all good. These are all good things. So you're originally from the Northeast then?
I am. I grew up in Bangor, Maine. Not a lot of people can say that. Home of Stephen King, so that's exciting. I grew up in Bangor. I went to school at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and then I lived in Boston for a couple years and moved out to Colorado for some bigger ski mountains.
Yeah, I love going to Boston. My family, during COVID, the first thing that they were asking is, when can we go back to Boston? Just so random.
That is so random.
But it's
especially for a New Yorker.
Yeah, and it's 3 hours from where I live, so it's not too bad of a drive. I don't know. Maybe it's just the family time together that they love, and there's pretty cool things to see in Boston. There's a lot of good stuff. I mean, I'll be a New Yorker at heart, but Boston's a pretty cool city too. All right, so that's great. You've definitely made a mark here, and I wanted to have you on today to talk about specific case that you had worked on last year, and also your experiences recently with going into the courtroom with COVID and what that looks like. So we're going to jump out and take a break, and when we come back, I really want to jump into all this stuff. So everybody sit tight, and we'll be right back.
Don't let asset investigations become a hassle for you. Let the professionals at JT Palmer & Associates, Inc. get you the information you need. We are a team of research specialists dedicated to providing you the intelligence that you're unable to locate through public databases. We have national and international resources available to provide accurate results to assist you in your asset investigations and in a timely manner. We work tirelessly to uncover exactly what collectible assets someone has. Whether you're investigating a business or an individual, our dedicated research team employs a range of techniques to bring the investigation to a conclusion. All information developed over the course of these searches is obtained in an ethical, legal, honest, professional manner. When you need asset investigations done right, turn to JT Palmer & Associates. You can contact our team by visiting our website at jtpalmerassociates.com or call 800-808-0078.
Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Rchel has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Want full data access without a site inspection? IRB Search gives you full Social Security numbers, dates of birth, up-to-date contact info, and so much more, without the inconvenience or cost of an inspection. As an added bonus, you can access IRB data on any device in any location. You'll always have the best data, anytime, anywhere. Visit irbsearch.com and use exclusive promo code PIPOD2021 for a free trial and 100 credits. Offer available for new and returning customers.
And welcome everybody back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. We're joined today by Rchel Roberts from Colorado. Rchel, how are you?
Doing fabulous. Thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well. So thank you so much for coming on here today. I know we had talked, like I said earlier, for a while. You had some life things that got in the way, some work things that got in the way, and it's just great to have you here today. So let's jump into the topic here. Wanted to talk about this murder or suicide, you call it, case that you worked on that was a pretty big deal. Was it back in 2020, correct?
Yeah, it went to trial in August of 2020. The alleged crime occurred in September 2019. It was really just a fascinating first-degree murder case that I think is the perfect example of how important timelines are in investigations in particular. Okay.
So let's dive into it. Tell me a little bit about the case and what your role in it was.
Sure. So the case it occurred in Denver. Client was an architect in his early 40s. He and his fiance lived in a bungalow in a cute little neighborhood south of downtown Denver. Client owned the home himself, but they had been together for several years. They lived together. They had plans to get married. They went out one night for a networking event. She was a broker. As I said, he was an architect. So their worlds collided a lot in a professional sense as well. Right. And so they went out at this networking event. He wanted to come home early. She wanted to stay out. He came home early. She stayed out a couple more hours. And then when she got home, it wasn't good. He wanted to have her sleep. the way he had a bungalow, and there was a separate unit on the basement level that they sometimes rented out for Airbnb. And it was not rented out that night, but he decided that he didn't want her to sleep in the main part of the house that night. So he locked her out of the main part of the house. He wanted her to sleep in the basement, kind of cool off. He was upset that she stayed out and was pretty drunk. Drinking was a problem in their relationship. They often argued verbally. No prior physical abuse or reports or calls to the home or anything like that. But friends and family would, attest that, yeah, they often drank too much. And when they did, they argued quite a bit.
Right.
And so at the time that the gun went off, it was about 12:13 in the morning. And they were the only two people in the house. And unfortunately, there was a neighbor who called 911. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but she had heard them arguing verbally prior to, nobody heard the gunshot actually, other than clients, including law enforcement who had been on scene for 15 minutes. And she gave them the wrong address accidentally. And so law enforcement was a little late to arrive. They also, based on the severity of the call from the neighbor, police were waiting. There were several units, and they were waiting for 4 units to arrive because of what they thought they were walking into a pretty serious domestic violence situation.
Right.
And it's kind of a classic example of how a single witness's report of assumptions can just cause a whirlwind of misunderstanding.
Sure.
So the neighbor that called 911 saw my client walk into, he had these sheds. He lived in like an old, it's almost like a farmhouse, but in the middle of downtown Denver. It's difficult to describe, but he had these old sheds, like 4 in a row, that lined up in the back of the property.
Right.
And the neighbor saw a client walk into the sheds and heard the female victim or deceased screaming and crying. And she assumed that client locked her up in the shed and was like assaulting her in the shed. But as it turns out, and this is something that is better to have a visual on, but of course I went into the neighbor's house and stood exactly where she was looking when she made the phone call, which is something the police did not do. And she couldn't see the, half of the property that had the house on it. She didn't know that this woman was actually banging and screaming and kicking on a door and was not locked in the shed.
The classic My Cousin Vinny, witness with the glasses and all that, right? I think they see
That's
something
right.
or hear something, and it's completely different, right?
That's right. And really, we got hugely lucky in this case. The public defender. So in the state of Colorado, when you're charged with first-degree murder, you are held with no bond until there is a hearing in which a judge decides the proof is not evident and the presumption is not great that you'll be convicted of first-degree murder. It takes a few months to have that hearing. So this occurred at the end of September 2019. We didn't have that hearing until the beginning of December. So clients in jail the whole time, not really able to help too much. There was a lot of digital evidence in particular that was, the entire case. And this is the type of evidence that I was putting into a timeline,
right.
To prove that he didn't do this. But really the biggest part of this case was he had Blink surveillance cameras outside of his property that the police never collected. And we were able to, the public defenders who got us, had the case for maybe 3-4 days before we hopped on it, had the mind to, his Blink videos were set to only hold for 14 days.
Right.
And so they told us about it, and we actually preserved it because, for a full year. We didn't want anything happening to these videos. They were completely exculpatory.
Right.
Obviously, you don't want to be charged with destruction of evidence or anything like that.
Yep.
But they missed the Blink videos, because, this is something I didn't know before this case. He had 3 Blink video cameras on his property because there were 3 doors, and he had one pointed at each exterior door.
Right.
Each Blink video camera has a different serial number, and the police officer who wrote the search warrant, or the detective rather, he only included one of the serial numbers. And it just so happened that camera, during the time period he requested, the battery died.
Oh my goodness.
So the other 2 cameras were fully functioning, but he didn't get the footage. And, I think Amazon definitely probably should have said something there, but they did not. And so the police never got it. And this is all something that we unveiled at the proof evidence hearing. And it's the primary reason why we were able to get him out on bond, because they were still arguing that, she was locked in the shed.
Wow, that's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. Amazing. What a crazy story. That's pretty interesting. So, okay. So you've got this thing. So you're hired on this, and now there's hearings that take place, right? And you have to go to court there. Let's talk about that a little bit, how that looked like during COVID.
Sure. Well, this was pre-COVID, actually. So
right.
the hearings were December of 2019, but my testimony at the hearing was pretty similar, well, more extensive, but similar to what I ended up ultimately testifying to at trial, which was that I made this massive spreadsheet that I turned into a pretty PDF, because lawyers don't like spreadsheets.
Right. Exactly.
And it just had, it had all sorts of input from, different discovery sources, like the Blink video, and he had Vivint motion sensors inside of his house, which was the other massively critical piece of evidence, because his story, he talked to the detective that night. As soon as he was taken into custody immediately. He talked to the detective for 45 minutes until it was clear, they were not believing him. They were thinking he did this. So, and he said from the get-go that he was in the kitchen when the gunshot went off. And so we were actually able to prove that the motion sensor did trip into the kitchen. Of course, you can't say who was there. It's the timing, which we can get into a little bit, depends on the system. But at least we could say, hey, look, there's this piece of data that actually supports that someone did go into the kitchen right around this time. Phone extractions, we had his cell phone, we had her cell phone, we had 911 calls and transcripts, we had the police CAD, and then of course you have all kinds of Bates PDF discovery. So I took all of these different sources and essentially created a massive timeline from 8 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. during, before, during, and after this was all going on.
Right.
And I think that's something that in varying levels should be done in a lot of cases. I do timelines in most of my cases, certainly all my big cases. And
right.
I think cell phone data in particular, I'm not a digital forensics expert. I can't do cell phone imaging, but one thing that I do often, and I think other investigators should do more, is analyzing these phones. I mean, you don't need Celebrite to use the Celebrite portable case file.
Right.
And the Celebrite reader report is far more valuable than any PDF you'll ever get. I mean, these phone PDFs are 60,000 pages long. You can't possibly go through that. I mean, the reader is just so fabulous. And
right.
We're the ones with the case facts. We're the ones that know it. You can only ask your experts so much. You don't give them all the information. So
right.
obviously have your experts do the imaging, but then I think it's important for investigators to take over, because I essentially export call logs, I export messages. You can export them right in CSV format and throw them in your spreadsheet.
Right.
Of course, this is kind of tying into my past of data analysis a little bit that I understand others don't necessarily have. But
no, so
I mean, that's the kind of stuff I love.
Be surprised. There's more of you out there than you think.
Okay, good.
I know quite a few investigators that have a strong data background that really, that quest for knowledge is really there. Yeah, that's fascinating. So really, the timeline stuff is just so important, right? Being able to put all that back together. So did it turn out eventually that it was a suicide? Is that what that was, or?
Yep. The forensic evidence in particular. So I don't know about New York. I know obviously in Colorado, they still test for GSR.
Right.
In the
that
state
was
of
the first
Oregon.
question that I had. All right. So
yeah.
Did someone do gunshot residue? Because, if it's a suicide, it should be all over. The powder should be everywhere.
Sure. And his hands were immediately bagged. I mean, law enforcement, there were 4 units already on the scene when the shot went off, even though nobody heard it. Client called 911 as soon as the shot went off. Then you had 2 people, the neighbor and client. He's hysterical. Actually, his 911 call was the basis for why the detective believed he was guilty, which we'll get into. But there was GSR on her hands. She also had stippling on her finger, or soot rather, and he did not have GSR on him. But I know, the validity of GSR is highly debated. Oregon state won't even allow it in court. So we kind of took that. In Colorado, at least, it's like, use it if it's good.
Yeah.
And if it's not good, then you question the validity.
Is your work like just only in Colorado, or do you work on cases? And you had mentioned federal before when we were chatting. Do you go outside the state, or you're pretty much sticking to Colorado?
I'm pretty much sticking to Colorado. I do federal casework. I've recently done a few cases in Wyoming. I'm licensed in Cheyenne. They don't have state licensing in Wyoming. Colorado recently lost our licensing.
Yeah. That's another show.
I have also been very more careful lately, mostly by learning from other NALI members about issues with conducting. It was always my understanding that if your case originated in Colorado and you had a witness that lived elsewhere, you could go and interview them.
Right.
But that is not the case after hearing from other NALI investigators and talking about the issues that they've had with some evidence coming into court when someone's not licensed in their state. And it's clear to me that that's not a risk you can take. So
right.
Now I will not be doing that.
Right. And we're talking about the National Association of Legal Investigators. It's a great association. If you do any type of legal investigative work, and you have it, I think it's 3 years experience to be a member. Folks, you have to join the association. What Rchel is talking about, like the camaraderie of having other investigators that do this type of work, a very, very active listserv. It's one of my favorites. I love NALI. It just, from the second I joined, and I worked so many years. I think I was like 13 years in business before I even joined. And as soon as I did, I was like, what was I waiting for? Like, this is such a great resource.
I was very fortunate because when I first got into this business, I worked for Ellis Armstead, who's, a legend among
is a legend. Yes.
Among us mortal investigators.
Sure.
And so he, that was the first thing he had to do was become a NALI member and brought me to the conferences, which was awesome. And it's just such a wonderful group of people.
Well, speaking of conferences, we'll give a shameless plug here. By the time this show airs, I think this Friday would be when the virtual conference is taking place. It's the 11th of February. If you are not familiar with NALI, come check it out and see the content. I know it's not in person, it's virtual, but it's well worth it. It's a great organization. They have a great schedule planned of speakers and all that. And NALI is a great resource, right? So it's not even just the work that you do and the site searches that we have or the data programs that we have. The back and forth with other investigators, there's real value to that. You speak of Ellis, that he's a rock star. You know, he really understands this kind of stuff. And even like going to a live event, I think you may have been down in Tampa with F. Lee Bailey. I mean, that was a game changer. This guy's like, you know, he's there and he's chatting with us, and it's like, it's not even the first time he's been there. Everybody knows him. Look, it's F. Lee. Hey, how you doing? This and that. And I'm like, I got to sit down and have lunch with the guy, which was crazy. Completely random. We sat at the same table, and man, it was such a great event.
Yeah, that was really cool to have him there. And you're right. I mean, it's just, especially the amount of experience in Mali and just the people from different walks of life and different places. I mean, we have members in Northern Ireland, you know, you can find people everywhere, and the resources, and just someone has done it before probably. And there's always someone willing to help. Yeah,
there's even a CLI from Canada recently, right?
That's right. That's right.
So that's very cool. So I wanted to shift over because I do want to cover a little bit of what your experience has been like being in court and testifying in court. The show that aired last week, actually, we were talking to a personal injury attorney and his experience in being in the courtroom. Tell me a little bit about your experience, what you've been through in the past year or so, having to go into court.
Sure. So this case that I've been talking about, the murder or suicide, went to trial in August 2020. I'm fairly certain that we were the first COVID trial to go in Colorado.
2021, you mean, right?
No, August 2020.
August 2020. Okay. All right.
August 2020.
It's all a blur.
Yeah. So yeah, I know, it really is. In Colorado, at least, you know, when the pandemic first hit, no one really knew what to do. Yeah. You know, it's like all the cases were getting continued, all the dates were getting continued. There wasn't a sense of when things were going to pick back up again. Right. This client was very frustrated because he was set for June of 2020 and very much so wanted to go to trial and did not want to postpone anymore, right, which the DAs wanted to. But we were finally, right. And there were a lot of lawyers that were, you know, we went to trial in August 2020 because client really wanted to go, but there was certainly a feeling among some criminal defense attorneys that it was irresponsible for us to go to trial because of the COVID setting and atmosphere. We almost mistried picking a jury because, you know, normally you pick a jury, you go in the courtroom, everyone's sitting in the gallery and waiting for their turn to be called up to the box. But this time, you know, they had to find a room big enough for everyone to sit 6 feet apart. We had, I believe, 97 prospective jurors. So we had 97 people measured 6 feet apart. It was super unproductive in terms of passing the microphone, being able to hear these people's answers. We got very lucky and the clerk was willing to stay late. Otherwise, we wouldn't have finished picking a jury. It took us 12 hours. We got our jury. It was all women except for one man, right, and which we weren't super thrilled about, but you know, you do what you can. And then once we got up to the courtroom, we were set for a 9-day trial, and the jurors sat 6 feet apart in the gallery of the courtroom. And equally awkward was the deceased's family was sitting in the jury box with our client's family, sitting 6 feet apart, but we were facing the jury box. So for the first few days of trial, the jury was just watching the decedent's family glaring at us, wow, you know, until I think once some of the forensic science started to come out, it definitely felt like there was a shift in the environment in the courtroom. Sure. But it was really tough. It was really hard. We had this TV, this great big TV that was on the defense side. The TV that was on the side of the prosecutors stayed in the same place in terms of digital evidence. As I said, there's a ton in this case because of all the blink videos. Right. And we had to constantly, it was me, of course, you know, get up every time something, turn the TV so the jury can see, put the TV back so they can see client, because when the TV was turned, they couldn't have a view of client. And as we know, every juror is supposed to have the same view of a defendant, which, we had jurors sitting at the very back of the courtroom. The lone guy on the case was definitely falling asleep throughout. He was sitting all the way back.
Really?
I know he was a videographer. I was really hopeful
that guy some filterless camel
storytelling. I know. So it was just, it was not ideal. And then I remember at the end, it was like this whole wait, what are we going to do with exhibits? How are they going to review exhibits? Because we can't have people touching anything. We didn't do jury questionnaires because they were like, well, how do we even collect pencils? It was just, the beginning of COVID, and obviously we've come quite a ways from then, but there were so many hurdles that you don't even really consider until you're in there. They didn't even pass out water anymore, for witnesses.
Yeah,
so
that's
it was tough to be able to read jurors' faces when you're selecting the jury. I think tough for I remember right during jury selection, we had our client wear a clear mask because we felt that an actual mask made him look scary, right? It was
a bank
kind
robber,
of mysterious, and so we were like, okay, we'll have him wear a clear mask.
Right.
But then the rest of us weren't wearing clear masks, and we actually had a juror say well, I think it's kind of weird because the lawyers that I worked for on that case are 2 female lawyers. So we had our male client and 3 females for the defense team. And this female juror stood up and was like, well, I think it's kind of questionable that you have a male defendant with 3 females representing him, and he's the only one wearing a clear mask. And that is something that I had never even thought about. I was like, okay, we all have to wear the same mask from now on because they're passing judgment on the types of masks we're wearing.
Obviously guilty of murder if he's wearing the wrong mask.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. Beyond a reasonable doubt, man.
That's crazy.
So
but
she was on the jury.
this is life, right? These are the stressors that we deal with, and I've been throw everything out the window this past 2 years. And that whole mask thing it's a big deal too, especially when the attorneys are articulating and making their arguments. If I had spoke to David Otto on the other the attorney the other episode, and he was saying that he had to give his oral arguments with a mask on, and it's like you lose a real real thing of being able to express yourself, those facial expressions where they see your eyes moving around, but they don't actually see your face. I think you really lose a lot, but that was different in Colorado, right? You said they were allowed to take the mask off.
Well, it was a little bit different. So we had some hearings in July, and the lawyers did have to mask up when they were making their arguments during those hearings. But by the time we got to trial, they allowed the attorney conducting direct or cross take off their mask, and they allowed the witness on the stand, if they were comfortable with it, to remove their mask. They had plexiglass up in front of the witness stand. And I would say most witnesses were okay with removing their mask and speaking without a mask on. Of course, that goes for the witnesses too, right? Not just the lawyers. I mean, you want to be able to evaluate someone wholly when they're speaking. So and now it's the same in court. So everyone's wearing a mask except for whoever's at the podium, attorney-wise. I've had actually recently judges, if they're addressing the court, they've started taking off their masks as well. Right. But it seems like every court's different. I mean, every jurisdiction is different. My federal trial that went at the end of September in Wyoming, the jurors weren't 6 feet apart. It's a little bit different everywhere, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on here. So what do you think is going to happen in the future here going forward? You think things will go back to being normal? You think they'll hold on to some of these things?
I really don't know. I do think the one great thing that's emerged from all of this is the court's willingness. Well, they've been forced to, but to conduct, hearings virtually and or hear witnesses remotely.
Yeah.
We've still had some pushback. We had a couple motions hearings earlier this week, and we tried to get someone who lives out of state to testify remotely.
That's the problem, right? They're not in state.
They wouldn't let us do that. We couldn't have that. We wanted to just call them on the phone because this case has garnered a lot of attention, and someone hacked our WebEx.
Oh,
and
fun.
So we shut down the WebEx so that no one could get in. Right. But then we had this problem of like, okay, well, we can't have this person testify on WebEx. The DA's objected to having them on the phone. So I feel like it's been nice and time saving. Sometimes the court is allowing this to happen, but and I think that should stay. I think that would be a good thing to stick around. But otherwise, I think it's just kind of been a colossal headache for most.
Totally. We almost had to postpone recording this episode because I had to go testify in court, which I was supposed to do in person, and I was supposed to do it on Monday. And they called me Thursday. We're recording this on Friday. They called me Thursday and said, hey, good news. We're through jury selection, and then we need you tomorrow. I'm like, I can't do it, in person, but I can do it virtually. And they're like, oh, we didn't think of that. Yeah, let's see if they'll allow to do that. And the judge actually was allowing it. They were going to do it. And as a business owner, I was like, okay, well, that's cool. I don't have to get dressed up and go down to Manhattan and all that. But then I also can't bill what I was going to bill for half a day. It's like, okay, I got to go in and my testimony is maybe going to take me 30 minutes, 40 minutes. How do I bill that now? Right. So that's
right.
I was in my mind thinking like, okay, well, it's cool. I don't have to go to court, but this is going to hurt me in the pocket. Right.
Yeah, I do think that in-person testimony is always better in terms of being able, both, from a juror perspective and from a legal perspective, at least defense, in terms of being able to evaluate someone right there. And when someone's on the screen, it's so much easier for people to not pay attention as much as they do when someone's there in person. But when you have an expert that bills $500 an hour and lives in California, and you're like, do we have $15,000 to fly him in for one hearing? Right. WebEx is pretty appealing.
Except when it gets hacked, apparently.
Except when it gets hacked, yes.
Darn those hackers.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to wind down here. This was great. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting about this and just relaying your experience. If folks wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Best way would be to email me, Rchel at robertsinvestigations.com. That's Rachel. Or I'm on LinkedIn. That's pretty much it for my social media, but right. I'm on there.
That's great. And I encourage you again, folks, if you're around on February 11th for the NALI conference, the virtual conference, come check it out. It's not that expensive, and it's well worth it. And I think they're handing out credits, continuing education credits, if I recall correctly. But now is a great association. That's actually how you and I met through that. So I highly recommend it. So, okay, so we're going to wind down. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week, and we'll catch everybody next week on the next show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Take care.
A special thanks to you, Rchel, for coming on and sharing your experience. We also want to thank Crosstracks, IRB, PI Institute of Education, and NCISS for sponsoring the show. So please support our great supporters. And don't forget, register for the free town hall meeting. Now, have you thought about joining Investigator's Toolbox yet? Now's the time to do so. Get on board and join the fastest growing digital community for investigative professionals. And use code PIP201836 to save 10% on your membership. If you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We want your feedback to bring you the best shows possible. And we'll be back next week with a new show. So make sure you tune in and stay safe out there.